there was no one else under the age of 30, let alone like under 25.
Yeah.
When I get a bit overwhelmed or like just high kind of emotion, I really mix my analogies. I become all of a sudden a terrible communicator.
Okay.
I came home and I was like, my box is full. If the business doesn't want to implement and there is a problem, they'll name the CEO and often they'll name the CISO.
Yeah.
And that is scary. Doesn't matter who's legally liable, it's my name that's on the line.
Welcome to Grab the Mic, Cyber Stories, a podcast dedicated to cutting through the technical jargon and smashing the cybersecurity echo chamber. Grab the Mic is a platform for the eclectic cyber voices that deserve to be heard and the stories waiting to be told. I'm your host, Eleanor Dalloway. Thank you for listening.
Hello, you're listening to Grab the Mic with Tash and Eleanor.
Thank you, and I'm sorry we don't have the clapperboard today. It feels really weird starting this podcast without the clapperboard, but it will be back next episode. Tash, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself very briefly, say what you're up to at the moment, because you've recently got a new job.
Yeah, so my name's Tash, and I am CISO, so Chief Information Security Officer for Zopa.
Perfect. I'm going to go back through some of your the trajectory of your career today in a minute, but I'm going to open up with a couple of icebreaker questions. So just short, quick fire answers. Ski holiday or beach holiday?
So I've actually never been on a ski holiday, but I think I would still pick it.
Really?
Yeah, I like the sports vibe. I'm like, yeah, let's make it
Nice.
competitive, like a holiday, but intense.
Maybe the weather outside is making you feel a bit Christmassy as well, but wintry.
Yeah.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Probably like criminal-esque TV shows.
Okay.
So like Criminal Minds, Lie to Me, Bones.
Fictional?
Yeah, fictional. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't think I'm down for the real life criminal documentary stories.
You have enough cynicism from your day job, probably.
Exactly, yeah.
Favourite tech ever that you couldn't live without?
This will be one bit of tech, but it uses three pieces. So
Okay.
you'll have to forgive me for this
Smart.
one. There's a feature on my watch where I can make my phone make a loud noise when I lose it.
Nice.
So
How often do you have to use that?
So like I would be like, very rarely, but my husband would say every other day. Yeah. A bit absent-minded at times.
What kind of noise is it? Like an alarm? Or?
Yeah. And even
Okay.
if your phone is on silent, it will ding if you press this button, and it's very useful for me because I'll leave it in random places and forget where it is, or it'll fall down the side of chairs. Or
I love that.
Yeah.
I'll probably have to get that name of that off you afterwards. What season do you feel most you in? What's your favourite season?
Spring.
Yeah. That feels like such a long way away today, doesn't it?
It feels so far away. I think everything is just starting to come into its own in spring.
Yeah.
You know, like you're starting to see a bit more greenery. There's a bit more hope coming.
Yeah.
Everyone's starting to be a bit nicer to each other. I like spring.
Nice. And finally, one a bit closer to the day job, ransomware, pay or not pay?
Not pay. I mean, I've not been in that situation, so I'd love to continue to say I would not pay. I think it's really hard to know until you're in that room, in that moment. Depending on what's at stake too. Yeah,
agree. I don't know if you remember, but I think was it the Telegraph that ran a really cool ransomware exercise? Did you do it? It was amazing. It would sort of put you in scenarios and you'd have to answer what you do. And it was really complex and you could go down multiple different routes with it. But at the end, it would tell you, you'd have to make a decision. And it was amazing because anything you thought how you'd act in a situation, it really challenged those sort of predispositions. Really good.
Yeah, so I've not done that one. I have had the pleasure of running tabletop scenarios before, which I love because you have to, you basically just get to fictionalize your worst nightmare and then make other people go through it. And it's very similar where people will have playbooks, they'll have these plans, these ideas, but then when you're in the moment, you just can't know. And I think I'll always stand by, my intent would be to not pay, to not feed into that world. But you have to have empathy for the people that are in that moment and the choices that they make and why they might be different to yours.
I think that's an excellent point. When you've run these tabletops, I find that so interesting. How far do you go with that? Like, do you have like actors or people in running that? Do you do it yourself? What does that actually look like?
I would love to have gone that far with actors. No, it was low budget at all times. So it's a storyline effectively, and I'll have like I usually have mocked up news stories or tweets or things like that to kind of help embellish. It usually starts with an alert or someone's noticed something or a message, very small, something not too obvious. And then it gradually evolves. And as the team are thinking about that, what they would do next, then I kind of throw more intensity at them. Now a journalist is reaching out, or now a tweet's gone viral, or now employees are concerned, or now this system's gone offline. It can be quite fun.
I was going to say, it sounds so much fun. It's like a gamification in a way.
It is, yeah. And I enjoy it because I think, gosh, these are the moments that make you most anxious as a security leader, and actually being able to be a bit silly with it, but also really kind of run through it as a training exercise with your team can be quite bonding as well. But it's also fun to kind of come up with like, what would the twists be that would make this scenario even more intense for me?
It sounds fun. Who would you have in the room for those tabletops? So is it your security team, tech teams, or do you bring in senior executives into those so that they're prepared for if and when that does arise?
So I've done a range. I've done slightly more informal just with the security team to really make sure that they understand their technical approaches and what they want to do. More recently, I've done them with leadership team members and been in the room where they've gone through scenarios hosted by others. And it's been actually really nice to have, your CEO, CFO in the room, the people in charge of the business as a whole, making sure that they understand the steps that you would take and the emotion that arises.
Yeah.
I'm always a bit nervous when you have that level of leadership as to like how seriously they'll take it. But they tend to get really into it, which can be really useful, but also quite fun.
It's also that sort of challenging dynamic that if you've got in that situation, if you've got a leadership that are divided in how they want to handle it, that can be really tricky. And I think our clients we've spoken to have had these moments where they just can't agree on the way forward and what they want to do. And then you get, it, like you said, it's very emotive as well. People feel really passionately one way or the other. And then you've got the clock ticking. It's stressful even thinking about that situation, isn't it? So actually having that opportunity to prepare and actually start asking yourself those questions before it happens live. Such good incident response preparation.
Absolutely, yeah. And even if you can't do the simulation, because it does take time, just having the discussion and being clear on the feelings of each person involved is really important. In a previous role, we had done a smaller tabletop scenario, but we also spent time just documenting, hey, what would our ransomware policy be? And if we wanted to make a decision, who would make that decision? Because there's obviously the legal implications, there's ethical, and there's technical implications too. And being able to have a really open conversation about not necessarily what the choice would be, but who would make the decision, I think in itself can be a really good form of preparation. Again, my stance has always been not pay, but I might not be the decision maker. And so I want to make sure that whoever is really clear how I feel in a non-emotive scenario, so that when you're then in that, oh my God, everything's on fire, high emotion moment and high adrenaline moment, you already feel like you know who the players are and who the decision makers are.
Exactly. And not waste any more time trying to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
You're CISO now at Zopa, which is amazing. Is ransomware always top of your worry list, or is there anything that's greater? Like as a non-CISO, a non-practitioner, I can't think of anything worse or more stressful than being put in that situation. But in reality, is that your biggest concern, or are there other things going on that worry you?
I'll never say I'm not worried about anything cyber, right? I think as a CISO, accept and run in this like constant level of anxiety in which I thrive.
Yes.
And then I just have to make sure it doesn't go kind of above, and sometimes for me even below where I feel I should be sitting. Yes, I'm worried. I think that I am not as worried as those that are not in cyber are. We're in a world now where offline backups are super prevalent, even backups of your configuration, let alone your data. And we're also in a world where like infrastructure can be redeployed through code, even if you don't own a data center. And so, yes, it is destructive. But the bit that's destructive is the data breach itself. And that could come in any form. So yes, it makes me nervous. Gosh, I hope that I don't have to go through it. But I think just data breaches in general are what keeps me up at night rather than that specific scenario.
You said something right at the beginning there that was so interesting. You're saying like that high anxiety environment is where you thrive.
Yeah.
I find that absolutely fascinating. So do you think that bodes well for the role of CISO? Like, do you think every CISO needs to have that quality or that disposition where that keeps them ticking, and that's actually a positive thing to them that they need in their job?
I think you have to work in any security role. I think you have to be able to manage anxiety or stress well, and I think that you should really reflect on your level of awareness if you think you are not stressed or anxious if you work in security. Yes. The bit that I am always mindful of is like, what's my appetite for stress right now? And am I within appetite? Like, am I fine? Like, there's some things that make me nervous, but actually they really drive me and I am enjoying it. Or actually, am I operating outside of where I feel comfortable, and do I need to make a change, whether that's in work or at home?
That's interesting. And have you ever felt, either in your current role or your role at Capital One or Moonpig, have you ever felt that you've crossed that line into the part of stress or burnout where you're not comfortable and it's actually too much?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And for me, like a number of times, and sometimes it's very, very short-lived. And sometimes it has been longer. Early on in my career, I remember having a conversation with my now husband at home, and I was feeling a bit overwhelmed. And I was, when I get a bit overwhelmed or like just high kind of emotion, I really mix my analogies. So I become all of a sudden a terrible communicator.
Okay.
And I came home and I was like, my box is full. And he was like, what? I'm sorry, what are you talking about? And I was like, my box is full. And I think I was trying to say that my cup is full, but not in a good way. And and what I meant was that, like, I pictured myself as an empty box and people just kept putting stuff in. And at work, I felt like people were putting stuff in and my box was full. Yeah. And I couldn't think of another way to articulate, like, no one else can put anything else in here. Like, there's no more space.
Full. Yeah.
And he was like, well, you need to talk to your boss, right? And you need to have a conversation. And at this point, I was in security. So I started in architecture, moved into security, and had been doing it for not too long, maybe a year or so. My role was to consult on lots of different engineering projects and give security advice and guidance. And you're balancing context switching. I would be talking about moving large data structures into the cloud. And this was right at the beginning of the cloud journey, all the way through to talking about good secure practices for third-party JavaScript. And then I'd be talking about physical security. And this would all be in the space of like 3 hours. So it's a lot for your brain to handle, especially early career. And I remember going to my boss and saying, like, I feel overwhelmed. I feel like my box is full. And he was like, that's great, but I need you to do this thing. I was like, oh.
Just zero empathy.
Yeah. And it was really hard. And I think what I've learned since then, and the bit that kind of keeps me going through those either short or longer lived moments of feeling like my box is full.
Yeah.
Is knowing what I can chuck out that will be fine. And sometimes, especially early in my career, I expected someone else to tell me what I could drop. And maybe they should have. But it's taken me a while to learn what I can drop.
Yeah.
And I know people have used the analogy of, some balls smash, some balls bounce. It's taken me a while to learn for myself, like what I can drop and then what becomes like my non-negotiables.
Yeah. And maybe the understanding that you're accountable for that yourself, and you're the best judge of when the box is too full and what you can do about it. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one. But how does it present itself to you? So in those moments, whether they've been short or long-lived, what is it that makes you realize or recognize that that's happening? Is it emotional? Is it physical signs?
It's a great question. It's a mix, I think, for me. My current boss will tell you that all of a sudden I will become very quippy and very, very, very witty, and sometimes not the best version of myself, but like I'll be quick off the mark in a response.
Okay.
And I'll be quite abrupt. I feel like all of a sudden I can feel my shoulders are higher, and I would have been carrying that tension, and I will feel warm but not warm, like I'll feel intense. Sometimes you don't notice it for days, right? Like you just all of a sudden think, oh gosh, I'm definitely feeling in that space of feeling tightness.
Yeah.
I've definitely had moments where I've been on holiday and something's been happening and I realize I can't work in this way, like something has to change, and maybe it's taken me too long to realize my box was full.
Yeah.
And I have to make a change, and that's always quite hard, because sometimes you feel it or you see it in yourself and you're not ready to.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in those moments where you step back and you take that time out, that's often where you get that recognition that there's something isn't quite right, or you almost need to stop to see that. Sometimes you're so in the weeds of daily work and job that it's hard to recognize.
Yeah.
And you do have a very big job for someone still relatively early in their career. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's been
you've come so far so quick. And not just a very young CISO, but a very young female CISO. Do you see that? Is that something that causes you challenge, or do you see it almost like a superpower, I suppose, that you're in a stronger position because you do defy the norm?
I think I expected to feel like it would come up more. I think especially early career, really, really early, banking at Capital One, doing architecture and then cyber, there was no one else under the age of 30, let alone like under 25.
Yeah.
Very few females. And I think I expected to feel it more. There's definitely been times, even since then, throughout my career, where I've been the only woman in the room, or the only person who's felt and looked and spoken like me. But it hasn't, I've been really lucky to work in places where it hasn't felt like it's been pointed out to me or really hindered too much. And I think I've had to really make sure that I've not carried it instead. Like almost, no one else has made a point of, I've not had as much experience in industry as them. I should probably make that. But like, it's been really hard not to be like, like this, I don't know. I found it really difficult.
That's interesting, because it's almost like you have been at times uncomfortable with the fact that they haven't said it, and you've almost wanted to fill in that gap yourself. That's really odd.
Yeah.
But understandable.
Yeah, I think I've always been the kind of person that, like, I don't want to sit with awkwardness in a room. I'd rather call it out. But then even early career at Capital One, like I would have come out of a meeting and then been like, on reflection, I was the only one that was female and probably under 40 in that room. But I didn't feel it at the time and I didn't see it. And then I'm like, maybe I should like I'm going to point that out, but less than about making me feel uncomfortable. I'm more of we should make a conscious effort to change that and bring someone else in the room as well and open that door. But certainly there, I was really lucky to have people that I worked for and mentors that really brought me into rooms that arguably I didn't need to be in or deserve to be in. And that gave me the exposure, and has been a theme I think I've had throughout, even before I chose to go to university, that's helped me get to where I am today. I wasn't someone that went to university straight away. I'm the first one in my family to go to higher education. And the only reason I ended up there was because I was working part-time at an Apple store. My boyfriend at the time was a big Windows, like Microsoft fan. And I was looking for part-time jobs, and I was like, it would really irritate him if I worked for Apple.
What an extra reason to do it.
And so I thought, I'll apply there. I wasn't necessarily hugely techie, but I did youth work, and they had a kids program where you taught kids over the summer to use computers.
Oh, cool.
And they actually spent a lot of time like training their staff. I learned to repair computers, partly because the job title was genius, and you got given business cards that said genius.
That's cool.
Brilliant. And I did that. And one of my managers sat me down once and was like, you shouldn't work here. I was like, Ross, that's really mean. And he was like, no, like, I don't think you should work here. I think you should think about university. And he was like, my wife, Susie, she works for UCAS. She's going to come in next week, and you're going to sit with her on your lunch break, and you're going to learn about university. And he genuinely made me sit on my lunch break, Cabot Circus Apple Store. And Susie taught me through what it would mean to apply for university, how I did it, what the deadlines were, what type of courses I should look at, and really encouraged me to do it. And it's people like that who've gone, I think you should be in a different room.
Yeah.
And really kind of made that space for me that I think has allowed me to move as fast as I have in my career.
That's amazing and incredible to think that perhaps without him, you may not have thought to go to university, and you may not have taken the path that you've taken.
Yeah, I'd still be arguing with computers and people that like to shove Doritos into optical drives. And
thank goodness for serendipity. You did say earlier though, in rooms that I didn't deserve to be in, you obviously did deserve to be in them, otherwise you wouldn't have been given the opportunity. So there's obviously that slight mindset where you do sometimes feel uncomfortable, I suppose, in that environment, because you don't feel like, maybe you feel that you've got there too soon. Just that language that you use suggests that.
I think I deserved eventually.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a space of I wasn't going to add value, and so they could have easily have had every reason not to invite me into that space. I think as it turned out, I mean, I was working on cloud, and so I was actually in one of the technologies that genuinely had been around as long as I had in industry. And so it was a space where I could add value early on. And I think that's definitely played a part in my career, is being able to grow up almost with some of these technologies. But yeah, it's hard to not want to stay in your lane sometimes, which is unusual for me. Like, I like to kind of ruffle things up a little bit and offer challenge, but equally you also feel that space of, I've got to this place and I'm hopefully doing well, and I feel really proud of that, but also very lucky. And so you are constantly thinking like, I probably don't need to go over and do that thing. Like, I can stay in my lane. And that's a really hard mindset to not stay in. Like, you don't want to end up being that person.
In the concept of imposter syndrome came up in both of our first two podcasts, actually. And we had such opposing opinions from Jenny Radcliffe, who said she doesn't buy into imposter syndrome.
She was like, I don't have it.
Yeah.
I'm amazing. I mean, she is incredible, and I can believe for a second that she doesn't have it. But yeah, she was like, it's not a thing really. And then Holly was very different.
I have it. I live with imposter syndrome. I feel all the time like I have it. Which camp would you put yourself in?
Neither. Yeah. No, I'm going to add a third
shade of grey.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is, there are moments, usually like a specific technology space, where, I feel wildly out of my depth. And then there are moments where I'm like, this is my thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm here to shine. Like this is where I feel strongest. And so I can relate to both massively.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in my current role, I'm lucky in that the boss who hired me was my boss in my previous role.
Ah, okay.
And so I'm a known entity to him. Like he
Mm-hmm.
knows what I'm terrible at as well as what I'm good at. And so that in itself breathes that confidence, I think, of knowing that trust that I've got from my leader
Mm-hmm.
creates trust that I have within myself.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are areas where I feel wildly out of my depth, and I'm absolutely certain that everyone else knows far more than I know about that one thing. But there are also other areas that I can really draw strength from.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, like, I hope to do the same for my team, which is hire people who I genuinely know are better than me at their thing.
Yeah.
And really encourage and amplify that to hopefully allow them to feel confident to take risks in the areas where they feel mad imposter syndrome.
And one of the best pieces of work advice I was ever given was always hire people that are smarter than you, or try to.
Yeah.
Because you can just, everybody has a place in a team, and you always need to find the people that balance out your skill set. And I think it's so tempting, isn't it, sometimes to hire more yous because you're comfortable with that type of personality type, and you recognize someone's skill sets or the advantages that certain skills bring. And it's so easy to just go, yes, I'll have you because you remind me of me. But actually, it's when you find those people that fill in those gaps and that have the strengths that you don't have, that's where you get a really good, diverse and high performance team, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very lucky at Moonpig to be able to build my own team. When they demerged from Photobox,
Mm-hmm.
I was the only one that came across in InfoSec. And so everyone in that team I picked. And they're a wonderful team. They don't look or speak like me at all. It's very different. We had someone I stole from, someone who was a lawyer.
Oh, wow.
I was like, you'll be great. Someone who did sales at Nestle.
Oh, wow.
Also great. I mean, that person could convince like any engineer to do anything because they were sales. Like that was their skill set. And so we taught the application security, like the tech side. But they brought like an incredible way with words, which I would have never have got from a traditional kind of security background. A real mix of ages and backgrounds and ethnicities, and that I think was really wonderful. And it just, there is a part of being able to pick everyone and really making sure that you don't fall into that comfort zone of picking people that look and speak like you. Whereas at Zopa, I've come into an existing team. And I thought that would be really hard, but it's actually been really lovely. They've all been genuinely wonderful. And I think they'll worry, I think, if they hear this, which is like, you know, I come in as they probably would have expected, right? Thinking I'll want to make some changes and bring my own people in. But that's not happened. And I've been genuinely surprised. And I think it shows the strength of the culture there. Yeah. That I've not come in and been like, right, they're out.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah. And really a real honestly relief for me as CISO, because it means I don't have to think about that thing. Yeah. I can think about something else.
When you mentioned then about how you used to work for Apple right at the beginning of your career, that strikes me as being like the holy grail for someone that's interested in tech. It would be like me getting a job at Penguin while I was studying my English degree. Like did you just think, wow, I've made it here?
I love working at Apple. It started as this kind of fuck you a little bit to the boyfriend I had at the time. But actually, many of the people I worked with were at our wedding. I met my husband at Apple. Oh. We have gone to India with friends that we met at Apple and on holiday, and we formed some really great friendships. And it was the culture they hired for there was incredible. It definitely was a great place to work whilst you're studying tech. And I worked all the way throughout university. I was lucky to have managers there that pushed me to go to university and then supported me through. It was a ride. I mean, I've not worked there now for like over 10 years, and I still have people that message me asking if I get a discount. And how to fix their phone. And I'm like, can you imagine how far the technology in your handset has moved in the last 10 years? Like, Like, I probably don't know how to repair it, and I almost certainly do not get a discount anymore. But I did love it.
It is probably one of the most, I can imagine, the most desirable discount jobs that you could get. Like people sort of saying, I would like some discount help.
Yeah, it was wicked. Yeah.
What did you study at university?
I am probably one of the only security people you will talk to who studied security. Yeah. I did forensic computing. Okay. It was quite a new course at the time. It's at Birmingham. And it's like a mix of computer science with digital forensics.
Okay.
So some of the people that I studied with went on to GCHQ.
Wow.
One worked as lead investigator for Manchester Met. They caught the Manchester rapist.
Wow.
And they did the forensic analysis of his mobile phone, which for anyone who would have followed the case know that was key in identifying almost all of the victims, as well as solidifying the criminal charges. So we had an amazing kind of course cohort and learned a lot, not just about computer science, but about forensics, cryptography, and a lot of the underlying technologies that actually are genuinely relevant to what I do now, which is so unusual because you don't usually talk to security people that have done any degree, let alone a security one.
Yeah, and hence your guilty pleasure.
yeah, criminal TV shows. I can't help it. I do get a bit upset when they are, they find a picture of the murderer and it's because it's a reflection on a car bonnet and they zoom in and enhance the picture. That stresses me out a little bit. But the rest of it I enjoy.
Did you ever have that desire to go into the public sector or into criminology?
Very early on, it was something that was interesting to me. However, whilst there's a lot of investment into research in public sector, naturally a lot of that is really safely kind of kept secret, right? Safeguarded. And so there was a huge part of me that wanted to be able to work commercially in the private sector and think about I'd love to be in a place where I could contribute back.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that in a way that I wanted to in the public sector.
Yeah.
But I will forever be incredibly proud of Pete, one of my course mates who worked on that Manchester Met case.
That's amazing. That's such a great claim to fame as well for him, isn't it?
Yeah.
Incredible. And after university, you went into the finance sector, right? Which is a far cry from public sector criminology. I was going to ask you how you found that going into the finance sector, but you've kind of done full circle. You've come back into Zopa now. So what was it? Was it a shock to the system, having come from the world of Apple and then obviously academia suddenly into the finance sector?
It was definitely hard. My dad was a window cleaner and then a jewelry dealer, and then my mum had worked at call centers. She then did study in whilst I was at university actually and got a finance degree. But I didn't have this idea of what an office job was. And so when I applied for graduate schemes and they were like, okay, I got this role at Capital One in architecture, and I was like, what is that? And I didn't know, and I had no knowledge of what to expect. And it was I think it was whilst I was at Capital One, my mum got her qualifications, and it was I just hadn't had that insight into office life before, so it was hard. It was just an unknown. The culture there was incredible. It was very family heavy. It was based in Nottingham rather than London, and I think that influenced a lot of the behaviours there.
Probably a softer landing into the corporate world as well.
Without a doubt. Yeah, it certainly would have been way softer than any of the kind of big banks. Otherwise. Yeah, which I don't think would have suited my personality anyway.
Yeah. And then going from finance sector into online retailer, I suppose, with Moonpig, what did you notice as the biggest differences in your two challenges?
It was wild as a change. Yeah. So at Capital One, I had been there for a while, I'd learnt a lot, but I was in your first role, you do feel are all the things I'm learning only useful to this one company? Would I ever be able to use this anywhere else? And some like people I'd met at conferences or meetups and kind of gradually built those relationships were like, no, that's actually just general knowledge. That's useful. And it took a while for someone to convince me, and they convinced me to apply for, at the time it was Photobox, who owned Moonpig. And I was like, okay, and went there, and it just so different. Like the risk appetite is way bigger. They move way faster. There's none of the, you're not reporting to the FCA or the PRA. Like you can do whatever you want, kind of.
Freedom.
There's still like a level of being careful, but like it's just way more intense and way more high speed. And I felt like I learned more in my first year at Photobox than I had in the last 3 years at Capital One.
Wow.
And Moonpig was much the same. Mad at innovation, embracing new technology, and it really pushed me to upskill really fast. And I think that really helped me to grow fast in my career, because I worked in environments like that.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. It would be remiss of me not to, as a CISO, I was sitting here with the CISO this week, the headlines about how the SEC have given or put fraud charges upon Tim Brown, who is the CISO of SolarWinds. Obviously, also on the back of the Uber, ex-Uber CSO, and the charges and earlier this year around that. There's obviously this huge push for accountability for the CISO role. How do you feel about that? Like, how does that make you feel reading that as somebody that has recently inherited that title?
It's this has been going around. We have a CISO WhatsApp group with a few CISO friends.
There's fly on a wall.
35 of us, yeah. And we it's been a hot topic in the WhatsApp group.
Sure.
Yeah, alongside like dinners and bikes and very boring things. It's really hard. I think my role is to advocate for what I genuinely feel is the right thing to do for the place that I work at that time. And the business's role is to take my advice along with, what they think their risk appetite is, and then to apply it or not apply it. And that's really hard, because my role isn't necessarily just to implement all the things that I want to implement. It's to advise and to champion and to challenge and to raise those risks and that awareness. Yeah. But I often won't actually have the ability to implement all the things I would love to do. And so that can be really hard, because you could feel like I could do so much more, or I could be more effective if I had all of these things. I mean, you can always play that game, if only. It's
a bit like the concept of living to your means, isn't it? Same is probably true in your role. You can always do more, add more, buy more.
Absolutely. And I think in financial services, it's almost easier in a way. You have there are a lot of regulations around who is actually liable and how you raise risks and manage risks. And so there's a level of comfort it comes, for me at least, working in that environment, because even though it's higher risk, we're likely a big target. There's a lot of processes in place to make sure that my voice is heard, and then it's a business decision as to how far they take it. With this case, and like I've said many times in the past in my career, it doesn't matter who's legally liable, it's my name that's on the line. And that is tough, because, and this is something that's come up in our CISO WhatsApp group so many times, which is, you could genuinely be the best at your role, like the smartest person, but if the business doesn't want to implement and there is a problem, they'll name the CEO and often they'll name the CISO.
Yeah.
And that is scary. For me, like, that's part of the role. That's part of the risk you take on. And I think if you want to operate at CISO, you have to know that that's a risk. And so when you look at new companies, you're not just looking at the pay or the benefits, or is it an industry I like? You're also looking at, does their risk appetite align with mine?
I can completely relate to all of that as well. I think the same is true in the role of editor. When you're the editor of a magazine, it doesn't really matter who is legally liable if we get pulled up on something or we get some kind of court case. It's your name that's attached. So therefore, you feel that burden and you feel that accountability. And actually, you know that when you take their role. So I totally totally agree with what you've just said. I'm going to ask you one last question before I go into the final section with the 3 big questions. You've achieved, as I've already said, so much so quickly that what happens now? Like, what do you have in your mind in terms of ambitions for a career trajectory? And are you the type of person that's always going to be in pursuit of the next big role or the next big thing? Or do you think you'll manage to find contentment reasonably easily? It's a big question.
It's such a big question. I've changed my mind a lot on this in like the last year. I was at a place where like, maybe CTO is the goal. Or maybe it's CISO at a very, very big company. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I think over the last year or so, I've then started to think about what other goals do I have. We went through an IPO, a launch on the stock market at Moonpig. I loved doing that. It was wild, stressful, but an amazing achievement. And a really great thing to have on my CV. I've started to think now about, I'd love to do more things like that. Like I'd love to do more IPOs. I'd love to go somewhere where I build a team again, or build a capability again. So I think it's less now about a title, and more about like, how does it become a really interesting project for me that aligns with what's important? I think I've got a couple of years in me, at least at Zopa, to really round out who I am. I am young. I've been through and seen like a lot already in the cyber world. But like I totally recognize that there are things that just come through time and through exposure, and through other people bringing me into rooms that hopefully I deserve to be in. But yeah, I think it's more projects now, things that kind of help facilitate the things I love. There's a few things that I have been really grateful to be exposed to recently outside of work. In the last year or so, Regina, who's a mutual friend of ours, right, she introduced me to Trace Labs. Trace Labs are a non-for-profit that use cyber skills to find missing people. I've really enjoyed doing that. That's something I've brought to my InfoSec team at Zopa. We now use our volunteering time, or we'll be using our volunteering time, to do that. And I think that's been a really neat way to complement kind of where I want to see me take my career, which is new and interesting projects, but also challenging how we can use cyber skills to do some neat stuff.
I love that. Okay, so the 3 questions I always ask everybody. What words or quotes or maybe even lyrics do you like to live your life by?
There's 2. There's a Macklemore song. Love Macklemore. This is so cheesy. It says, "Make the money, don't let the money make you." Yeah. And I think when you're in tech and you're in security, it's so easy to chase the next promotion or the next big role. And that can really craft what ends up becoming your career, rather than driving like the journey that you want to go on. Yeah. And especially like coming from a low income background early in my career, my goal was to earn 50K by the time I hit 50. I'm on a very different trajectory now, but that was the goal. That for me was a huge sum of money and like the pinnacle of what I could aim for. And early on, I risked allowing decisions to be made purely based on that. Now it's a privilege now to live a life where I don't have to do that. And it's a privilege I need to recognize. But it's something I try and come back to. Is it's easy to feel back to like university time. I've got £2 to go for the next 4 days. Like it's something that I try and be mindful of. And then the other is comparison is the thief of joy. It's just so easy to look at others and think, God, they're living a really chilled existence, whereas I'm like mad anxious about patching.
But that's the curse of social media, right? You will see the grass is always greener. What's a controversial opinion that you have, or an unpopular opinion? It's a really hard one then.
Yeah, it's so hard. I don't think you can gamify cybersecurity awareness.
Okay.
Like I genuinely, like I know so many companies make their money from this, and hopefully none sponsor or become future sponsors. You can only gamify things that people already want to do, right? Already want to play at. And I just think with cybersecurity awareness, gamifying it for people that aren't already wanting to be a part of it, it's just not going to work. I spent a long time trying to get people into a place where they pay attention because it's interesting. Mm-hmm. And so at Moonpig, we used to do this Friday afternoon call, anyone could dial in. And we would just talk about our favourite news stories from the week, of which you would often be a huge contributor. And they'd be everything from like a man accidentally severed a finger and carried it around for 2 weeks because he couldn't unlock his phone otherwise. All the way through. Yeah, I know. Genuinely happened. All the way through to some pen test partners research where they hacked sex toys, and this guy got stuck in a chastity belt. Yeah, the only way out was like he could take the ankle grinder or the high voltage.
I remember this.
Imagine making that choice.
Oh my God.
And that's how we made security accessible, was by talking about like hilarious but wild stories that actually brought it really close to home for people.
That's a fantastic one.
Yeah. So I don't think you can gamify it and it work at scale.
Yeah. Fantastic. I like that one. And finally, what's your victory song or your happy song? So if you've had great news, you've achieved something really big, what song do you play? Or blast?
I talked about Macklemore, huge Macklemore fan. Probably, it's not really necessarily a victory song, but I've just always loved Thrift Shop, so I would come back to that one. I love like old school hip hop as well.
Do you?
Yeah, a bit Ice Cube. Would just throw that in there. Be great. I'm just love music.
So feel good as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Do you know, the thing I find so interesting is you sort of said you thrive off of like these high pressure environments and anxiety inducing work, but I find you so calming. Like I find you just so relaxed, and it's just you're always so easy to talk to. So I think that's such a lovely contradiction that you have both sides to your personality. So thank you so much for coming today. I'm so happy.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Eleanor Dalloway, and you've been listening to a Grab the Mic production. Join us next time for more unmissable cyber stories. On my fringe game, hell no. I could take some pro wings, make them cool, sell those. The sneakerheads will be like, he got the Velcro. I'm gonna pop some tags, only got $20 in my pocket. I'm hunting, looking for a come up.